This week on the show, we are delighted to be joined by Gillian Edelstein. Now, Gillian is a photographer of considerable note in the UK, a portrait photographer and a documentary photographer who has more than 100 images in the National Portrait Gallery's permanent collection. She's won multiple awards over the years and has photographed seemingly everyone from the bottom to the top. A real smorgasbord of subjects have gone in front of your lens, and subject matters, really. But I guess your background, Gillian, has always been with social and documentary photography. So can you just tell us a little bit about your kind of origin story? I know that you were born in South Africa, but please kind of update the listener as to how you got into photography, what your beginnings were.
Thank you for having me. So the story was that I grew up watching a very seriously an unequal society at work. Apartheid was in full flow. And my mother in particular was working in the townships a lot. She was the chief medical social worker at Groote Hospital, which is the hospital where they did the first heart transplant. So my very early memories are going into District 6 with her. Now, District 6 was a place where it might be un-PC now, but they were called the colored mixed race community, were kicked out of. And they had a very hybrid, exotic, lively community. So a very early memory is of them being thrown out and this chaos. And I think right from the start, there was this idea that that the whites were privileged, blacks were not. How is this happening? My fondest memories of being on the shoulders and the back and being held by my nanny, who was, and protecting them when police came in to check for what they called a dumb pass, which dumb pass means literally the pass for the dumb people. And my parents hiding Gertie and Ben, who were the people who lived at our home, to help us. And so right from the start, I remember my mother trying to dissuade me from doing sociology at university on the campus. No, you're very good at languages. Later, she said, film is the new zeitgeist. But I was determined to do social to help. So I did social work, sociology, social anthropology, and psychology. But no sooner did I graduate, my first job was working with the National Institute and the Crime of Rehabilitation of Offenders. And so I was going into the townships and having to take case study notes. And so I felt I was just propagating the status quo. But on campus, I had also discovered a camera, and I discovered the darkroom, and I discovered the magic of prints coming up in the chemicals. And it somehow got a grip. But I also realized that it was something that had been there always. I was always collating the family album. I was the one. I had a little Instamatic camera. So on our holidays, I look back, all the photographs were the ones that I had taken. And so while I was still working as a social worker, which I did for 1 year, I guess, I was in the townships and I started taking photographs of my clients, whether they were tattoo artists or people who just come out of prison or in prison. And then it shifted, and that's what happened, really.
So that kind of early grounding then in the social, the psychological side of things that you were witnessing. How did that? You went on to work for the Rand Daily Mail, I believe, in Johannesburg. Yes. And there, being more of a newspaper photographer, you're covering all sorts, right? So you're having to cover not just humanitarian stories, but you're covering sports. You're covering, I'm guessing, all sorts. So the life of a newspaper photographer is every day is different. How did with that kind of range of subjects, what did that kind of teach you about photography? How was that grounding, and how do you think that affected the rest of your career in terms of that and
Yeah.
that early
Yeah.
formation of who you were as a photographer?
It had a huge effect on me. I came into Johannesburg, press darkroom, very diverse group. So there were guys who'd come out of Soweto Township. They used to call me Mafuta, which means fatty, because I was. But I had the Robbie Chabalala, hey, Mafuta. But I would go from photographing somebody who'd become the beauty queen of the Witwatersrand of Johannesburg to nighttime cricket to somebody saying, listen, Jill, there's 6 people on death row. 3 have been given life sentences. 3 are going to be hanged. This is literally what I was told one night. I want you to go to this township to photograph them feeling happy because they got a life sentence. And I want you to go and photograph those that are going to be hanged looking very sad because they're going to be hung. I mean, I kid you not. Sometimes I'd come in and they'd say, what's the matter, lovey? Have you got a period? Sometimes my byline would be Julian. So I remember being sent out at just before midnight to photograph Rodney Axe, who was a rapist. It was my first press award image. Rodney Axe had escaped from prison. He'd been on a raping, murdering spree, and he'd escaped from prison. And I remember this terrifying moment where I had to go out just before midnight and arrived in a cul-de-sac in the middle of Kilbrow Township, reversing the car because nobody was there. Somebody said he's there. Anyway, he wasn't. But later, having to photograph him behind a gate where he was coming out of a courtroom, and he escaped again from the warders, from the security guard, and ran, picked up a brick, and was coming towards me and the journalist, who were behind a gate, but with a great big brick in his hand. If you look at the photograph, you can see a man looking with shock in the background, him coming towards me with the brick. And if you actually look, his zip is his fly is undone. And you can see clearly he's got an erection and the brick is in his hand. And I remember it was the first photograph I remember hardly being able to breathe, just stepping back as I tried to take these photographs.
Wow.
But that wasn't the only time I remember taking photographs where I could hardly breathe. I guess the other experience was, besides being once in El Salvador under a threat, but was when the victim and perpetrator happened to be in the same frame. And I never believed that was ever going to happen when I was working on my book, Truth and Lies, about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I remember not being able, it was a 4x5 camera and I was under the black cloth, but could hardly breathe because this moment had arisen. And I know I've jumped to Truth and Lies, so forgive me if I have.
Do you think that with photographing those kind of things, you're really seeing life for everything that it can offer you, for good and bad? You're at the coalface of journalism when you're photographing those kind of things, by the sounds of it. What was do you think that was formulated a bit of a turning point for you in terms of, you subsequently became very known, especially with the Truth and Reconciliation Project, for your ability to sit in those rooms, sit in those moments, those uncomfortable moments with people and represent them and to document that, those incredibly emotionally charged moments. Do you think that there was a particular turning point where you moved towards a kind of more intimate kind of relationship-based way of working? Or do you think that was always there because of your background and growing up, witnessing what you witnessed as a child with your parents working the way they worked?
I think it's a combination of the two, because after I'd worked in press for 3 years in Johannesburg, so I moved from the Rand Daily Mail to the Star, and I really was doing a conglomeration of all kinds of assignments. We were on a rota, and we'd go from, whether it was 9 to 4 or 12 to 8. But I then thought, I really need to go and study. So that's how I ended up here at what was then LCP, London College of Printing, now London College of Communications, at the first year of photojournalism. And the interesting thing was that I had worked very hard on a portfolio before I left. So I was always in the darkroom printing it up. And this photo editor from the Sunday Times arrived at the college and said, what are you doing here? And why I'm telling you the story is that it relates to your question, because strangely for me, he started asking me to go out and do portraits. I had assisted a fashion photographer and a commercial photographer, both in Cape Town and Johannesburg. The commercial photographer was actually from Manchester, and I'd learnt a lot about lighting, darkroom, being in the darkroom, and medium format cameras. I think later I came to 4x5, and maybe I taught myself, I can't remember. But it was that moment at the Sunday Times where it suddenly became very clear to me that it was this relational power and the duo and I've talked about it recently. I realize, I hope I'm not repeated myself, but if you don't put out, you don't get. So it's this kind of performance that you're playing to the other person, and that it's a two-way process, because if you don't get back. But it's also the in the moment, the ideas that you may find. I'm not formulaic. I've never have been. But I know that I've more lately started kind of not quite storyboarding, but kind of in my head trying very hard to think of kind of ideas. My greatest fear is boring people. And I can quote certain art directors who I remember that I was photographing a famous writer, American writer called Armistead Maupin, who wrote, I think it was called Tales of the City. And I recall struggling on this shoot. I just knew I wasn't getting it. And the photo editor at Harper's said to me, wow, Gillian, talk about breaking the boundaries of portraiture. And it always, for quite a long time, it went around in the back of my head. And it was that thing that, this idea also of really wanting to reflect and be real about the person and need integrity, blah, blah, blah. It might sound like a platitude, but you want to honor and you want to surprise, it felt to me. Has that answered your question, Greg?
Yeah, no, it has. It has. I think it's kind of, it's fascinating to see that to hear you talking about that duality of portraiture. I think that's not something I've heard. I've heard many different theories on portrait work, and my own personal theory is that there is that sense of tussle and there is a bit of a power game that happens with certain portrait work. But the idea that in order to get back, you've got to give. I guess it chimes into the idea that a lot of portrait work is effectively a form of self-portrait. You are actually reflecting what you see in the world, which is fascinating. So I guess part of that answers my next question, which is really about how you create trust quickly with a subject, and how you kind of tune into that right energy to be able to get what you need out of people. And you're saying that it's really about exposing yourself before they are willing to expose themselves to you.
I'm of the firm belief it was that. And I remember it, I don't know why your question makes me think of the portrait I did of Primo Levi, who was the Holocaust survivor. And it wasn't long before he died. And there was a controversy about whether he'd committed suicide or fallen off the staircase in his apartment in Milan. But I couldn't at that time speak a word of Italian, and he didn't speak any English. And I remember this moment where I met him in this hotel, and we had to communicate really through a series of gestures. But I had one light, I remember he lifted up his glasses and this beautiful shadow fell over his face and then it disappeared. And then I had to try and explain to him that I would love him to do it again using hand movements. And we managed. And through this whole communication, and I'd read his books before. Now I think about it, the bizarre thing is that through all these extraordinary people that I met pre-iPhone days, I wished I'd taken for example, I'm thinking of James Baldwin, Go Tell It on the Mountain. It was like one of my first set books that I read, and not taking the book with him and asking him, please, could you write something there? But I think it is that thing, if you're putting yourself out there and you are showing yourself, and very much it's like a sort of autobiographical moment, I guess. It's you're examining yourself and showing your vulnerabilities. And if anybody can see that, perhaps it helps the situation.
So it's funny, isn't it? Because I like to maybe think of myself as doing that similarly in a way, but I feel like I'd never get enough time to kind of be able to do that, and then it always feels a bit rushed, and then I kind of always kind of feel like I've kind of blurted something out, and then we have to get to it, and sometimes it kind of has the opposite effect. Maybe I feel
that you've said something and then it's okay, so that's a very interesting point, because I know that one of the things I sometimes do is I explain it as going into a tunnel. It's almost like tunnel vision. I don't, like, you probably have this as well. I can go on shoots and not go to the loo and not drink and just go on for hours. And similarly, if there's a tiny amount of time, I know that often when I'm working in a studio, I don't like music. I want it to be quiet. So there is that thing. If I'm talking, what you're saying is it's distracting. It's distracting. So it's almost like you gauging the situation in the moment, needing to. Is it better for a silence, or is that going to make things awkward? And if there is a silence, what is your sitter, subject, person putting across? And it's almost like having to feel the situation. This is where I think things like having done psychology, sociology before did help, because somewhere along the line, or kind of reading a lot, that somehow, it helps to just quietly assess the situation. That maybe sounded pompous, and I didn't mean it to be.
No, God, no, not at all. I think a huge part of our job is actually the psychology of dealing with people. I would argue probably it's that over almost everything else, because if you're not able to make people feel at ease or kind of feel like they can be themselves, well, you're only going to get what you then are. You'll not get their true self.
So, for example, have you ever photographed somebody where you felt it was implacable? I have photographed.
Gillian, I'm so sorry.
Like sort of
implacable is.
So, I think the meaning of the word implacable is where it's almost you not getting anything back.
Oh my God, brick wall stuff. Oh yeah. I've had that, and that's tough. That's tough.
So I remember having it with Tony Blair in Downing Street. It was for a magazine, and I really feeling I'm not getting anything. I'm struggling. And I do tell this story because it's a fun story. But But when I went, I had to go and photograph him again in East Jerusalem when he was working for Quartet. I know there are controversial things going on at the moment with him, but there was a moment where he was kind of in a very different headspace. It's clear he was suddenly, quite smug and together, kind of full of himself a bit, and very excited to learn that my remit at Downing Street was that I had 7.5 minutes, I kid you not, but that that he had given me less time than Nelson Mandela. I was told I had 10 minutes. I love that story.
Yeah, it
makes me giggle.
It is tough. I the other day or the other month got told I had 1 minute, and then that 1 minute actually became 4 seconds.
How? Yeah. How is the question? So did you get a frame?
Yeah, I got 4 frames because there's someone crossing the road in the background. by the time they reached the other curb, we got it. And actually, do you know what? It ended up being quite a nice day. He was actually he was all right with me, but I think it was just kind of like landed upon him that suddenly there was a photographer appearing out of nowhere.
I think it's an element of, back in the day, there was a certain gravitas to being photographed by a certain publication, and maybe respect in terms of time. And now there's so much content, in inverted commas, that's being made by so many different publications that has somewhat disappeared. But with that, you've also got the increased control of PR and kind of, that kind of handling of celebrity. And I mean, for me, it's always been, the portraits where you're photographing a lesser known artist or writer or whatever are normally the ones where you get the most back, because it's quite often it's just you and the subject. And I think maybe historically that was, you can tell me, but I think that's probably more prevalent that you would have those situations, whereas nowadays it feels like everything is quite controlled. So your time, to be able to spend a whole afternoon with somebody, or at least a few hours and go for lunch with them, feel like distant memories of the way things used to be done. And maybe those kind of encounters are increasingly rare.
I think you're absolutely right. And I remember from ages ago, having PR people, for example, Woody Allen, he would have gone on and on, but no, the time came and that was it. And, it's a difficult situation. And I suppose it's why with celebrities and the portrait image, and I think that's why I've always kept dipping into documentary, is the truth.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting to see with your, with the documentary that you did, Truth and Lies, on the Truth and Reconciliation, the approach to it on the 5/4, it's got this real kind of classic portrait, feel to it, the kind of in the vein of Avedon and Penn and people like that. How do you think that your visual language has changed and been influenced and there's something about those pictures which I think works so well because you pare everything back so much. And that's why that kind of approach has always worked quite well, when you pare everything back and simplify. So it is a black and white portrait of somebody that really just gets to the heart of the matter. But now with your current work, how do you feel do you still have that approach? Do you change your approach depending on your subject? How do you feel about the way that you work now?
I think, there is a thing now, because whether you like it or not, it could be construed now as outdated. Though, if you go to the Gagosian Gallery right now and see the Avedon, it's mind-blowing, actually. Yeah. It's mind-blowing, the American West. And I was influenced by that work, and I did want to simplify. I wanted to strip it back, and I wanted, most importantly, was to treat the subject of both victim and perpetrator similarly. I didn't want to there to be differentiation. I know when I was a younger photographer, sometimes I would kind of use a wide angle and go lower so that almost like it was this obvious thing of trying to belittle somebody, which is, as you get more experienced, you realize that's, dim-witted response. So there was very much a preemptive preempted decision to put the perpetrator right in front of the lens and treat him as I would the victim and see what came about. And the extraordinary thing was, anyway, that those perpetrators came forward and put themselves right there, And I knew it was a testament. It was a constructed images that would, I hoped, stand the test of time, really. And it was important because I didn't see it being done anywhere else, and I knew it was important.
Yeah, well, it certainly works. It's an amazing body of work, and it as you said, part of the reason it works is because you're not pulling any tricks. You are keeping it pure and simple and allowing the person in front of the camera to respond to you being there and present themselves how they want to be seen. And in doing so, you create some incredibly powerful portraits because of it. I mean, that's, for me, the joy of photography is it can be very simple in some ways.
But at this point, there are certain editors that I need to thank, because there were people like Liz Joby, who helped me with the edit, who was very clear and said, we need context. Go back, photograph lands, so it was then that I had probably a little bit been doing landscape. I mean, the road to Craddock was a response after I'd seen this hideous rural prison, and I needed to somehow emotionally digest it and explain it. And so the image that I did, which was on a large format Polaroid type 55 image, and it's in the middle of nowhere, and it just shows this road. And for me, it was like, how are these people that would, I'd seen the rural prison cell with torture things hanging up. And how do you compute that you're there? You have no recourse to any legal, your family, nobody. And people can come day and night and do whatever they want with you. We've seen it in prisons around the world now. And we know that thing operates, but how terrifying. So I stopped in the middle of nowhere. But what I'm saying is that it was Liz Joby who after that said, you need context, go in, do more landscapes. And so through the years, the creative directors have pushed me, and I hope I push myself as well, to kind of diversify. And now I'm thinking of when I was in COVID in a quarantine in a police, it was called the Police Hotel, which felt like the prison hotel in Sydney, while my mother was dying less than a kilometre or two down the road. And then going into the minutiae, the still life work. And of course I'm shifting as well my project after Truth and Lies, which started very much like I photographed Truth and Lies, because the photo editor at the Sunday Times had said, I want these Edward Curtis type images. And it was after that I thought, no, you have to start moving to color and making it sort of more fluid. And again, so it was really that combination of the portrait, the documentary, wanting to be more fluid and shifting from the color, the black and white to the color.
Yeah, I guess some of that is based on the simple process of the way that you photograph as well. If you're shooting on 5:4, it does limit you to some degree, whereas if you're shooting, a medium format rangefinder or something, it's going to lend itself to a different type of work.
Yeah.
When you've obviously also done filmmaking, you've done documentary filmmaking. Where do you think where was the biggest creative adjustment for that? And do you think that what does a moving image kind of offer that the still photograph can't? Where do you feel Why would you do something as a documentary over a photographic project, I guess is what I'm asking. What are the differences and what are the strengths and weaknesses?
It's a good question. I suppose the feature documentary that I've worked on for the past 10 years really is a portrait. It's a portrait of a man I met in 1999. It's a long time ago. A screenwriter who wrote the iconic films of the 70s. He wrote Saturday Night Fever, Serpico, Susan Sarandon's first film, and the first film about slavery in America called Mandingo.
Mm-hmm.
The story about him was, and I think everything is autobiographical, is that he was bipolar and it blighted his career entirely. So if you look at it, if you look at the big picture, it's still a portrait, really. But what happened is that I had gone to New York a lot. I was working on my affinities project, so I used to go backwards and forwards. And his on-off lover lived in New York, and she was my sort of surrogate mother, and she had a loft in Soho. So I had quite a good access to New York in the early 90s, which is how I got to Jim Jarmusch and Willem Dafoe and Allen Ginsberg and Quentin Crisp, extraordinary people. And I discovered the story of Norman Wexler, this screenwriter who was Academy Award nominated, but that his career had been totally messed up by his sort of bipolar, which was on a level that is hard to imagine. So I now have a 90-minute cut on that film. But have I answered your question? I think it was. The reason is that things started coming to me. Somebody from CNN sent me footage from him. I started doing drama recon, so reenacting scenes, because what I haven't explained is that it began with a film script that she had written about their wild and strange relationship. And the fact that she had brought the idea of disco to him initially and then had sort of been written out of the script because they broke up. And it was later that Robert Stigwood bought the rights to the film and brought in John Travolta. And I think things started coming to me, and then I started making things happen, i.e. film interviews, drama recon. I would take a crew, which I did, pretending it was an American highway, and find one mimicking that in Mallorca, and find a Cadillac that was American. So there were things that were very new to me, but I love working with a crew, and there was this thing with this mix of photography and film where you can think up an idea in the moment. For example, when we were photographing an actor called John Schwab on this so-called American highway, except it was in Mallorca. And then I had this idea that he would crumple up the screenplays, the scripts that he'd been working on, and throw them into the air as he was driving the Cadillac. And the shot, totally worked. So again, it was in that moment, which often happens to me with the portrait work, where something will occur to me about how people should be, interacting, which I find challenging and exciting.
Well, it seems fascinating because on the face of it, they're two very different mediums to do portrait photography and documentary photography, in the sense that with documentary, traditionally it would have been about, finding what you find and recording that. Whereas the portrait photography, it sounds more like there's a performative element to it that imbues a creativity and a response as well to the subject. And I guess with documentary photography, you are also responding to the subject, but there's maybe more of a playfulness that can be used in portrait photography, and by the sounds of it, with the film that you're making, in a sense that you can really explore those creative impulses. And do you think that maybe you personally get different things from those different approaches? You know, like maybe the documentary photography fulfills one part of your need and your personality, and the portrait photography fulfills another.
100%, because whatever happens, that those early years of the apartheid and seeing extreme injustice at play, it never leaves me. It just never does. So, if I'm hearing about, like I did, the refugee crisis, and I had the opportunity to go to Lesbos, Lampedusa, the boat graveyard, and Calais, I can't not. In the same way as when I was mentoring young men at Arsenal, and they were telling me about their tough lives, gangs and having, and absent fathers, and then I'll sort of dream up an idea. Oh, okay. So what are your worst fears? These are your worst fears. Okay. Well, let's think of doing a project like that, which in fact Counterpoints Arts is resurrected. So I've got to go into that again. But you are absolutely right. So there's two parts of me, and they tussle and they don't leave me, and they need to come out in the work, like I'm sure you both experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating aspect of our jobs, right? We are constantly having to adjust to the job at hand and kind of find a creative way to approach it and find the best medium to tell that story. So I guess in a counterpoint to what I said, they're not actually that different, because they are about our responses. But what's so fascinating with photography is they're incredibly individual.
Totally. And we're having to do, if we embark on projects, there's the research that has to be done. So for example, I find myself with the Norman Wexler, I wrote to the FBI I discovered I could do a FOIA request, freedom of information. And suddenly these files started coming to me in the same way that the CNN man said, oh, I've seen something online, and so I'm sending you this footage of Norman Wexler at one of the Kennedy's assassination attempts. There he was. And so it's wild. And
that is mad, isn't it?
Yeah. And then when I found, again, research, I found this recording. I haven't talked, by the way, about my documentary feature ever as much as I'm talking about it right now.
No, it's great.
So I hope it's okay.
Exclusive. No, we appreciate that.
Exclusive. But I found a recording where he says to her, I'm going to Hollywood with disco. So should the film, there was a discussion, should the film be the woman who was left out of the Saturday Night Fever story? The point is they were together, because I don't want to do spoilers, but it's very interesting. But she was the one who first encouraged the writer of Saturday Night Fever to go to the disco right at the beginning.
It's an amazing story. So what's the plan for that? You say you have a 90-minute cut.
I do, and I need, and I will get it, an interview with John Travolta, who went to the disco with Norman Wexler, and I need him and want him to give me that interview, which would be a very short interview, just talking about that experience. And the point is that there are lots of film and music and what are they called? Clips that have to be paid
Licensed.
for. So,
yeah,
exactly. Sorry.
No, that makes sense.
I could say that again, but because I mumbled, but it is film and clips that have to be cleared.
Of course. Well, can you do us a favor? Can you please keep us in a loop for when that is kind of, you have a release or there's things that people can see? Because obviously we'll talk about it on the show when that kind of the time happens. Not that that'll make a much difference, but, it's just very happy to share it. I would love to just ask you, a couple of questions about being a woman, if that's all right. So
Sure.
obviously you touched on this earlier when you were in South Africa, and your byline would sometimes be Julian and things like that. It would be great to hear how things have changed, and also how things maybe haven't changed, or things haven't changed as much as they should have done, or kind of what's your experience having had such obviously an illustrious career?
It's hard to answer that question. I do notice that there are a lot more women, successful women photographers, and there are those. But the interesting thing is, there's a need to identify as women photographers, because it seems like there has been this inequality, and I think that there's a much more of an acceptance nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Do I see as many women photographers out there? I think there's a reasonable established equality now, it seems to me. It's very hard to know exactly, but I do think it is easier. And I think there's less of when I was working on the Rand Daily Mail, there were 2 women and the rest were all men. Mm-hmm. And I remember being told, there was with the ANC, the African National Congress, had been bombed, or they bombed something, and they wouldn't send me. They said, and you understand, lovey, so it was like, you, a woman, can't handle this.
Yet they would send you to photograph a rapist.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Good point.
So I do feel like there's obviously been some questionable decisions.
Yeah.
But that's But do you feel now that you would? It's not easier, but like, for example, with the being sent to photograph a rapist, obviously from a safety point of view, I understand that, but from an equality point of view, why shouldn't you be sent? Do you know what I mean? It's a tricky one. Obviously, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near them either. But do you feel like now you might not be sent to that?
It's a very hard question to answer. I think that I haven't been on a news desk for a very long time, so I have no idea. But I do know, what I can tell you is that somebody like Aidan Sullivan, who worked at the Sunday Times, who made a huge difference, because when I was pregnant, when Harriet Logan, who was another photographer, was pregnant, he sent her to Afghanistan. He sent me to photograph. I think it was a big story about single mothers. He sent me to photograph, do some portraits 10 days after I'd given birth. That's something somebody wouldn't have done. And so he set a real example for kind of going, come on, let's be real about what women can do and what they do and what they can achieve. And I do see a much more regulated ambience and situation around women and women photographers now. I do.
With that in mind, do you have any kind of thoughts on this? The idea that obviously you'd be commissioned, editorial photography, you get commissioned, you get sent somewhere. That whole model is slightly disappearing, and it's terrifying for those of us who have made a living out of it and enjoyed the aspect of being commissioned. The joy of having, as you said, somebody like Aidan who can say, this is the right person for this job, and I'm excited to see what they bring back from this assignment. And there will have been countless people like that in your life, I'm sure, Gillian, who were like, let's send Gillian because we're excited to see what she brings back from this. Where do you think we are in terms of moving into the next generation of photography, like the state of photography and state of editorial photography? How do you
So
feel
what
about it?
I feel quite upset about it, desperate. I think that people are scrambling around to understand it. I think there is now, if I'm not mistaken, tell me if I'm wrong, but there are people kind of knocking on the doors of grant applications, of project ideas to apply for Arts Council grants and funding, because whatever happens, you have to think out the box, and you're having to create. If you're passionate about the work, which I think we all are, that it's much harder to get those commissions you're talking about, Greg, much harder. And so it's almost like there is no choice, but we have got to keep going and create the work we do. If we are passionate about it, there is no choice. That it's almost like we are self-commissioning, I'm afraid to
And
say.
that will be hard, I think, for a lot of people to hear, because how do you fund the work? How do you, and then it's kind of like, that's a classic catch-22, isn't it? Because you want to shoot the work, you can't afford the work, you can't fund the work. How do you then get commissioned for the work? And it's that kind of like, it's a terrible circle of things like that. And then I guess the trouble is, and I've had this personally, is when you go and shoot a bit of personal work, or you shoot what you thought you might be commissioned for, and then when you send it out, it kind of falls a bit flat, or flatter than you might have, hoped. And then it's very hard to kind of like G yourself up to shoot the next project, which is sort of in a weird way kind of where I am at the minute. Is because I spend quite a lot of money on a project, and it was a lovely set of portraits. I was really pleased with it, but I feel like there was something missing from it, and so it just kind of fell a bit flatter than I was hoping. So
I think I can't even disagree with you, sadly. I think the toughest thing is we also know that there are all these photographic awards, and that everybody's entering, and you also know that there are people kind of getting money for it, so they get extended, so more and more. So and so there are names that coming up and out of nowhere, and you're wondering, where's the past accolades, or where's the past work? So it's become global and huge and mammoth, and harder to get the work seen and realized from the people that matter, that where the work matters. I can't tell you how hard it is, and for I think all of us. And so it's not that we can't disengage, but you have to. But it's become almost like a long time ago. I remember this actress said to me, "Oh, this is a million years ago. Oh, it's a global village." It's more than a global village. It's an overload, and people are pouring out colleges and universities, and everybody with a phone. That too, AI. You can pop a button, and everything is shifted. It's a very different world, isn't it?
Sort of feels like there's not the attention span left for stuff like that anymore, because everything has got exponentially faster. You would have been working for monthly magazines, and it's weekly magazines, and it's newspapers, and then it's within, everything's changing within the next hour, and then suddenly it's 24-hour news cycles. And
but the good thing is, I have to tell you, at the these amateur photographer awards the other night, Lee Miller, her son, took up an award where her exhibition at Tape Britain was the biggest numbers, if I got this right, that they've possibly ever had, and the biggest numbers of a woman artist than they've ever had. So it just shows you what we actually construe as significant and important and powerful. And we have to keep holding on to that and making that work.
Well, it's also
come out there.
it's the historical aspect of it, isn't it? It's the fact that it becomes part of the history. Those images by Lee Miller are now there. They're a testament. There's no taking away from them. They exist in the world. And I guess having that sense at the back of your mind that you might not be photographing this for next week's audience or next month's audience. It might be for an audience 10, 20, 30 years down the line that are going to see these images, and finally they might get the acknowledgement that they deserved. So there's always that. But I think with that, I'd be fascinated to hear what one bit of advice you would give your younger self as a photographer, or any photographer who's starting out. Is there anything that your career up to this point has really made you realize?
So for me, the narrative as part of it is extraordinarily important. So I've always kept a diary, but I would have been more fulsome in it, even more fulsome in it. That's number one. I'm a hoarder, so I would have always, kept as many notes and whatever I could, and written more about the procedure and the situation and the context. That would have been my note to my earlier self, really. I thought I was doing a jolly good job. I needed to do even more, is the truth.
Interesting. Yeah. So is there a chance of a autobiography at some point?
I mean, you sort of have to, right?
We want to hear some of these anecdotes. I've heard a few from you in the past that, I mean, some of them were hilarious. There was one particular one with Tony Blair and talking about Bill Clinton's fingers. I can't remember where I heard that, but that you've got a trove of them, I'm sure.
I'm giggling. I do.
You know the story I'm talking about, don't you?
I do. It was Lionel. I think it was Lionel Barber, who was the editor of the FT.
That's
magazine.
where I heard it. He told me this. I photographed him for the FT when he left, and he told me this story. Okay, thank you. Go on.
Did he tell it well? He loves that story.
Well, I laughed a lot, so yeah. But please, I'd like to hear it from you.
It was it? You can tell the story. Remind me. It's something about Tony Blair saying I got Bill Clinton and him saying they could compare large sized fingers, right?
Yes, and it was something to do with the fact that to do with pianos, wasn't it? That's what comes into it. It was basically it was somebody mishearing something. Was it you mishearing something?
It was. I think I'm going to talk to Lionel Barber again. But what I do remember about that shoot, and it being also very funny, and I was probably in the moment not concentrating on the story, but concentrating on the fact that I asked Tony Blair to sit on the very edge of the chair because I had this idea from his position and what was going on and how controversial it was perceived, that he sit on the edge of the chair instead of on it directly. And he did actually do it. And it helped the image, is the truth.
Right. I think what
it was a metaphor, a metaphor for him falling in my head.
Yeah. It's hilarious that you've jogged my mind on that. I think it was something to do with it. He said something along the lines of pianist fingers.
Yeah.
Was that the big hands?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I misheard that.
Yeah. Anyway, it will come out in the book, in the forthcoming book that we're going to make you write.
You're going to make me write it. I love that. And a lot of people have been asking me that now. How are you going to do the P. Diddy one and that story?
I have actually just seen that Sean Coombs is on your website. Yeah.
When he walked out of the shoot, stormed out, and then his bouncers, security guards had to run after him. I don't like that. It was like the trick of tethering.
Yeah.
And it was this cover shoot. So we there had to beg him to come back.
So he'd seen it because you were tethering, basically. I mean, that's a modern, phenomenon that has mix, as a double-edged sword, because obviously when you were shooting medium format film back in the day,
Didn't see.
somebody might see a Polaroid, but that's it. You've
But it
maintained
happened to me twice. It happened with Gillian Anderson as well. And she got very upset. And we've seen each other since, and she did sort of almost apologize, but then she threw a hairbrush. And because she was...
Sorry, she almost apologized and then threw a hairbrush?
No, the hairbrush, the throwing, she saw the tethered image and didn't like it. And it was a cover as well. And then threw the hairbrush because she didn't like what she saw. I don't know if it was the stylist or the makeup or whatever. And then later I saw her at a party and we talked it out. But
well, you know who's at fault though. Who got hit by the hairbrush?
The Mirror, or the
right. So it was
I think
the
it was
Mirror. So she
Farm Road Studios got hit by the hairbrush.
Wow.
Upon reflection, she probably shouldn't have thrown it.
Oh, don't start on it.
Sorry.
Okay, so we've got to this point in the show though where we were talking about your book and the book that we're gonna force you to write. We are now going to put you onto your desert island, and unfortunately, you are going to be stranded with only a photo book and a desert island camera. Desert island photo book to start with. What would it be for you on your desert island?
So I've thought about this. So my story, there's a story of the book. I was commissioned to photograph by an advertising agency in Rotterdam, I think it was, to copy Avedon as images of in the American West. I was fairly appalled, but I thought, okay, if I'm being paid, I'll do what I need to do. And what I'd done as well is I took the book, which was a signed copy.
Wow.
And I'd been put up at this rather bougie hotel. And one day I came back from the shoot and the book had been nicked. So I still think about that signed copy of the Avedon in the American West. So maybe I have to say that if I'm allowed to, I would have said probably Robert Franks, the Americans, but it would be, there it is. That's the two sides of me,
Did you ever get it? Did you ever get it back?
I never did.
Did you get paid enough on the job that you didn't feel so bad about?
No memory of how much I got paid on the job, but
God damn, because that assigned, was it a first edition?
It was a pretty amazing book.
God damn. Because that's a special thing. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, God damn it.
Well, for listeners that want to get a copy, I know that it's recently been reissued, hasn't it? The American West.
Okay.
So it is something that you can. It's still in print, but obviously, one that's been signed. That's a blow.
And
you do ever see one on Rotterdam's eBay?
Yeah,
it could be Rotterdam. It could be anywhere. Sorry,
could be, yeah. But very quickly, the other books that had a great impression on me were. Was a book that had Annie Leibovitz and Mary Ellen Mark in it. So they were the two women, although the first woman photographer I ever saw was a woman who photographed my mother on her wedding day and me as a young child. So I must have realized that this was a possible thing. But that I have to say that those were some influences.
Okay.
Nice.
And what about your desert island camera then?
Camera. Can't I have
bear in
three?
mind, there is a film lab. There is a film lab on this island.
Let's talk through your top three then, and we're going to make you decide on one, but let's talk you through your top three.
Okay, so it would be the 4x5, it would be the Hasselblad, and it would be probably my Canon, but it would a specific lens, which I broke last summer, or it was broken. I think somebody broke it and pretended they hadn't.
You don't get much luck. Like with these things, somebody's broken a lens, and then somebody stole your book. Well, no, somebody stole your book and then stole your lens. But
my favorite lens, it was I think it was Is it the 28 to 70 or the 35 to 70? I think it's the 28 to 70. The most exquisitely brilliant Canon lens. And I know that I had taken it to Indonesia and somebody handed back, I think threw it on a, and it's the next time I saw it, it was smashed. And it's a lens that, you know, when you have a lens that just has, you have such good memories and you loved it and it produced the most extraordinary results for you. So there you are.
Now, obviously, it's a bit of an unusual focal length for a modern lens. So what fitment was that? FD?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it
right.
was.
Okay.
Yeah.
My favorite thing about some of those old FD lenses is that there are a few of them that are really radioactive. I don't think the 28 or the 35 to 70 was, but yeah, some of the primes have got you're not really meant to have them because they've I can't remember, was it something was it not radium? There was a coating on some of the outside elements that was so radioactive that the Geiger counters go crazy when you go near them.
Oh my God. Wow.
I think it was like a holy trio of radioactive ones.
Eek. I could go and get it for you now, but we don't.
Oh, do you still have the broken?
I have the broken. Yeah.
That's good. At least you still have that.
I told you I was a hoarder.
Yeah. I'm intrigued to work out which lens that was. What about your 5.4 though? What were you using?
I always used a Wister.
Yeah.
And with a lovely velvet cloth over my head. And I remember there was one fantastic moment where I was on the Lesotho border on a rock, on a tripod, trying to photograph this incredible other rock formation that reminded me, it looked like it had created the shape of the African continent. So I was determined to get this portrait. And I think at that point I had for some reason brought my 2 kids on this shoot. They were really young. They were how to walk to the local rural school. At one point, this was a great story. I would go off into the hinterland and leave them with sort of like some local hippies. And there was one point where I came back and my daughter had fashioned a piece of jewelry, which was apparently a little spoon to put cocaine in. She was about 6 years old.
All right.
I discovered that after. But anyway, I was on this rock and there was this tripod and literally in slow motion, I just saw it slowly just collapsing and the Wister just smashed right down. It almost concaved. I don't have that one, but it concaved. It literally I left it. It was on my Sangoma project, but that was pretty amazing.
Oh
man.
God. So do any of your favorite? I was going to say, do you have any working cameras that you want to take to the desert island?
Yeah.
You mean that I own right now?
No, just like I can't believe they're all broken.
Is this a plea for a manufacturer to come forward?
Well, out of those 3, which would have been your kind of like top favorite one?
It's such a good question. It's
they're all
so
very
difficult
different.
because I've used them equally. But if you make me make a choice, it's impossible. I'm
It's
about
like choosing
to say,
between your children.
yeah, it feels like that. Can I just say, I can't, I won't. I'll be the first person to ever say that.
We'll allow it.
Am I allowed?
Yeah. Well, listen.
I love them all.
Jillian, thank you so much for your candid answers to our questions, because honestly, you've been a fantastic guest to have on the show.
Absolutely.
If people want to see more of your work, where can they see it? Are you active on social media? Is your website the best way to go?
Website or Instagram. I'm not very much, not enough on LinkedIn, a little bit on Facebook, I think, because things automatically go, don't they, from Instagram to Facebook. So, yeah, any of those platforms.
Well, we will link to those in the show notes so people can find you there. Where can people see what's coming out next that people can see? You've got this film project in the offing. Your autobiography obviously is in the offing now officially.
Autobiography coming up shortly. Affinities, the Affinities book. Gost, who did my last book Here and There, they are publishing, and probably not before the end of the year. And that's work that began in the early 90s, analog, and then moved into the digital. And it's about creative collaborations. If you want a very quick précis, it depends if we had time. I can tell you it started, it started with me. The first line is, in 1990, my boyfriend found a better girlfriend. And what happened is that I dumped my local expat community and threw myself into work. And then because I was meeting people through work, people like Jane Horrocks, the actress, and a friend of mine called Tom Miller and Patrick Gale, they were people I wouldn't have met if I hadn't been working. And I suddenly thought, wow, that's the story. That's the project. So I started photographing iconic creative collaborators of our time, and then started working on it again in 15 years later or something, going, I wonder if these people are still working together. And then started like Hanif Qureshi still working with Stephen Frears? Do Gibbons and George, would they still choose their cleaner, Stainton Forest? And it was a fascinating story, because when I went to them, they said, no, Stainton's gone back to the Caribbean. He was their cleaner. But we're working with his niece, Paulette Forest. Stainton Forest has gone to Caribbean, but Paulette is with us. So I did an updated image. So It's a bit of then and now.
Oh, nice. It sounds like it sounds like it's going to be full of anecdotes itself.
And it's fun. And the people like Jilly Cooper said, I'm sending you a blank check. Or Eve Arnold said, I hate being photographed. I'm too busy. I won't. Or what's her name? Amazing writer who said, I hate all of them. Sorry, I am difficult, but was now I'm trying to remember who it was, but it was powerful stuff that will be.
This brings it back to that advice, and I think it's to always keep notes of these things, because that's you said that, and that is something that I wish I'd done a lot more with portrait work over the years. Those little kind of anecdotes. You meet these people and they come out with some. I mean, I photographed Jilly Cooper, and I think she called me a vicious bastard or something along those lines, because I'd made her pose for one more picture with a Randy Stallion. But yeah, it's those things, you need to write them down at the time, don't you? Otherwise, they get lost in the depths of time.
Ruth Rendell, sorry, it was Ruth Rendell. I don't like any of them. I apologize, but difficult, aren't I?
Classic.
So that's great. Yeah.
Well,
so exactly.
When that comes out, let us know, and we will talk about it. We'd love to maybe get you back on the show when that comes out to talk about it as well. That'd be great.
I'd love to. And thank you for having me. Really kind of you.
No, thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Jillian.